Good evening, everyone. Before I proceed, I would like to make a humble request to everyone present over here to kindly switch off your phone, or you can keep it on silent mode so that we do not have any interruptions during the session. And let me introduce myself. My name is Kunga Chindan, Program Coordinator of Tibet House, the Culture Center of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, New Delhi, and I'll be moderating today's session. On behalf of Tibet House, the cultural center of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, I would like to extend our warm welcome to our chairperson, Professor Vivek Suneja ji, former Pro-Vice Chancellor of Delhi University and former Head and Dean of Faculty of Management Studies, University of Delhi. Our guest speaker, Mr. Ashish Kothari ji, founder member of Kalpavriksha, member of Many People's Movement. Right. So with this, now may I request our chairperson, Professor Vivek Suneja ji, guest speaker, Mr. Ashish Kothari ji, and our director, Venerable Geshe Dojit Abdullah, to kindly light the lamp of eternal wisdom and proceed to the dais. Ladies and gentlemen, may I request every one of you to kindly give them a big round of applause. Thank you. I would also like to warmly welcome Mr. William and Ms. Laura Hoggy to kindly light the lamp of wisdom. Um, Thank you, Mr. Haji Vidyaji and Geshe Tenzin Harullah. Thank you very much. All right. With this, we'll begin today's session. Before we begin this lecture, I would like to briefly introduce you all about Tibet House and its activities. Tibet House, New Delhi, was established in 1965 by His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama of Tibet for the purpose of preserving the cultural heritage at the time when it faced forceful challenges in Tibet, as well as for providing a center for Tibetan culture and Buddhist studies. His Holiness the Dalai Lama's recurring emphasis on developing a sense of universal harmony and compassion as its own effective antidote to global suffering, together with the needs for a meaningful exchange between different religious and cultural traditions, also had a profound effect on the purpose and its activities of Tibet House. Tibet House aims to bring together Buddhist masters and Tibetologists, people across different disciplines, students and practitioners, and the common man through its various programs and events. Tibet House continues to expand its objective in saving Tibet's heritage and in exploring and working towards Tibet House's potential contribution to the ethical development of the modern society. Over a period of 5 decades since its inception, Tibet House has come to recognize as a significant institution for the dissemination of Tibetan culture and for Nalanda Buddhist studies. Tibet House has a museum of valuable Tibetan art and artifacts, as well as a library with nearly 5,000 volumes of manuscripts and books, a resource center, a conference hall, a gallery, and a bookshop. Tibet House offers various study programs on Nalanda Buddhist philosophy, conferences on interdisciplinary subjects such as neuroscience and Buddhist psychology, quantum physics, spiritual ecology, and universal ethics, a publication unit which publishes several books a year, and a program division which regularly organizes lectures, seminars, conferences, film screenings, and exhibition. Tibet House also offers 4 different courses on Buddhist philosophy, psychology, and Tibetan language course. First, the first batch of Nalanda Master's Course, which was launched on 9 December 2016 on the occasion of 51st anniversary of Tibet House, New Delhi, in the gracious presence of His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama, along with Sri Kiran Rijijuji, the Union State Minister of Home Affairs, and Sri Najib Jung, Lieutenant Governor of Delhi. The first batch of Nalanda Master's Course, Batch 1, is completed with 372 students from 44 different countries. The second batch of Nalanda Master's Course on Nalanda Buddhist philosophy has already started in July, in which around 900 participants are enrolled from 54 different countries. Secondly, the Nalanda Diploma course was launched in 2018. 3 batches has been successfully completed so far. Nalanda Diploma course, which is a 14-month course. This course is designed specifically to accommodate people who are more seriously interested in Buddhist philosophy while being in the midst of busy schedule with other engagements and commitments. Till now, we have successfully completed with 3 batches, and the 4th batch of Nalanda Diploma course is now being offered both offline and online, with a total registration of 1,770 participants from 73 different countries across the world. Third, Tibet House is pleased to present the second batch of Nalanda Certificate course, which has commenced on 7th January 2024 with active registration of 1,371 participants from 80 different countries. I would also like to inform you all that the last date of registration is on 31st January 2024. Now, Tibet House also offers Tibetan language courses on a regular basis. There are 4 levels of learning offered at the very nominal fee with special discount for students and monastics. Till date, 25 batches have been successfully completed, and the 26th batch has commenced on December 1st, 2023, and is running successfully with a total registration of 127 participants. Now, may I request our Secretary, Mr. Tenzin Kunjabla, to give you the welcome address. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mola. Good evening, everyone. Respected Professor Vivek Suniji, our guest speaker, Dr. Mr. Ashish Kotari, Tibet House Director Keshe Tojdamdullah, dear friends of Tibet House and advocates of environmental harmony who are gathered here today on a chilling Saturday evening. It is with immense pleasure that I extend a heartfelt welcome to you all on behalf of Tibet House to our annual Spiritual Ecology lecture. Today, our focus converges on the pivotal theme, the ethics of radical ecological democracy. This morning, our program coordinator informed me that our director wanted me to give the welcome address, so I did some minor research of my own. The environmental problem is global, not only because it poses risk to the humanity, but also because its solution requires significant universal effort. It is challenging to the humanity in general and each individual person in particular. In today's world, we are faced with the need to recognize our moral duty to nature. Environmental pollution primarily affects the life of animals. The mass death of animals due to oil spills, radiation, pesticides, etc., has become familiar to all of us. How does spiritual ethics solve this problem? Buddhist tradition recognizes that animals, like humans, are sentient beings capable of emotions and some level of thought. As such, there's no question that animals are capable of suffering and that humans should also consider their needs when making ethical decisions. The understanding of law of karma can help to overcome the gap between actions and their consequences. The law of karma states that all our actions, words, and thoughts form the conditions of our existence in the future. Each of us experience the consequences of what we think, what we say, and what we do. Thus, the law of karma encourages a person to take responsibility for his current life as well as all our future ones. Even a bee, when taking honey from a flower, it does not damage the flower. Each member of the ecosystem of animal, plants, and microorganisms has a role to play to keep a healthy ecosystem. His Holiness Dalai Lama says that as a Buddhist monk, his concern extends to all the members of the human family and indeed to all sentient beings who suffer. So I hope that today's lecture brings us together to strive to cultivate a deeper meaning, a deeper understanding of our responsibility to nature and spiritual dimensions that guide our connections to the environment. I extend my deepest gratitude to Dr. Ashish Kothari for accepting our invitation and Professor Vivek Sundarji to chair today's session. Thank you, and hope you all enjoy the enlightening discussions ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tenzin Kunjapla, for putting a light and emphasizing on the very importance of the environment and the ecology for which we are gathered here. Right. Now, coming back to our main event today, as we all are gathered here for the annual Spiritual Ecology lecture on the theme, Eternity in a Second, the Ethics of Radical Ecological Democracy, which focuses on this pluriverse, placing it in the context of the ecological, socio-cultural, political, and economic crisis that the world faces. And Tibet House is absolutely delighted to invite you all for this annual lecture on spiritual ecology, as it is one of the highlight programs. And we organize this lecture every year, keeping in mind the importance of environment, conservation, and our responsibility as a human being. I would convey my sincere appreciation to Mr. Ashish Kothari for taking out time, keeping its importance, and accepting our invitation for today's lecture. Thank you, sir. On this note, I would now request our Honorable Chairperson, Professor Vivek Suneja to kindly begin the session. And may I give a brief introduction about Professor Vivek Suneja. Right. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Good evening, everyone. Wonderful to have so many warm-hearted people warming up a cold Saturday evening. I think half the job is done, and the rest, our honorable speaker will do justice to. It's a delight to be here. Anything that His Holiness Dalai Lama and Tibet House under him organizes is blessed. So we're all blessed to be here together. We saw the wonderful work that's happening in Tibet House. My dear friend Doji is in the one who's stewarding all the, and I think many of you go to Tibet House, some of you to regularly to attend his programs, some brilliant stuff going on. And one of the most important functions that Tibet House does every year is this annual spiritual ecology lecture. In fact, I was remembering I was also chairperson, thanks to Doji, in last spiritual ecology lecture we had, which was on the warming of the Arctic. And I realized one whole year, therefore, is gone. The Earth has gone around the sun once. I don't know whether I'm any wiser, but I'm certainly older. And it's great to be back here. I was just noticing the wonderful poster we have up here. You have the Buddha there, and there's a people tree. Yeah, there's only one plant whose botanical name has the word religion in it. So this is called religiosa, Ficus religiosa. Yes, the people tree, because the Buddha. So this is ecology. When he meditated, it was under a tree. And if you notice the shape of the leaf of the people tree, it is heart-shaped. Yeah, it's coincidental. It's almost a heart. Nobody cuts the people tree in India. Yeah, nobody does it. Just because the Buddha sat under it and meditated. And maybe something about the people tree and the heart leaves there helped the Buddha achieve enlightenment. There's already some ecology there. Of course, there's all the Jatak tales of all his previous lives as animals with the Buddha. And then, of course, you have His Holiness planting a tree there, your birds. It's just a beautiful, grand poster. And look at the name, Eternity in a Second. So when I saw this, I was reminded of this great poem. Some of you might have heard it by William Blake. The poem is called Auguries of Innocence. And there's this one stanza there, which is my favorite stanza in all of English poetry. It says, to see the world in a grain of sand and heaven in a wild flower, to hold infinity in the palm of your hand and eternity in an hour. I'll repeat that. So to see the world in a grain of sand and heaven in a wild flower, to hold infinity in the palm of your hand and eternity in an hour. Today, it's eternity in a second. So I'm most intrigued. I was just asking, you must explain how in a second you can see eternity. Timelessness. Eternity perhaps is not long periods of time. It is beyond time. It's timeless. But we'll wait and see why that has been chosen. Infinity in the palm of your hand. Spiritual ecology. I'll just take a couple of minutes and I don't want to get in the way. It's very interesting, the topic. Ecology we hear about. Spirituality we hear about. Spiritual ecology. That's most fascinating. What on earth is that supposed to mean? I think in Buddhism, in Vedanta, in Sufism, I think all religions are basically clear. This is a dream of form. Our eternal reality is beyond form. It's formless. It's infinite. It's illimitable. The essence of it is love and beauty and goodness and joy. Bodies come and go. Matters come and go. Emotions come and go. These things are ephemeral. We are eternal. All of you here, we are eternal. We are one and eternal. It's a play of form. Yeah. But if there has to be a play of form, let's have a good play. Let's have a good sport. Let's not make it a war. I often tell my students of management who often are so narrowly focused on profits and competitiveness and so on. I say, look, life is a game. So there's a badminton court right outside. I say, if you play badminton, if you play trivially, yes, then there's no fun. Yeah, you have to play it hard. You have to play. But play it as a sport. For God's sake, it's just a game. If you get your egos invested and if you get depressed because other guy has beaten you, this is no longer a game, it's war. Then it's Russia, Ukraine, collective egos at war, it's the Gaza, what have you. So if there has to be a play of form, let's make it a good game. And remember, it's just a game. So wake up, remember it's a game, maybe continue to play the game for the heck of it, yeah, until you decide not to. But it's a play of form. It's a spiritual ecology. Spirit is what we are, which is formless, infinite, eternal, play of form. Let's make it a good game. And if the play of forms, human being is only one form. We arrived very late on this planet. Yeah, Homo sapiens. Sapiens, by the way, means wise. Yes, I don't know how wise we are. Homo sapiens. We arrived very late on this planet. Yeah, the Big Bang happened 14.6 billion years ago. We've been hardly there for some million years ago. In fact, Homo sapiens been there and civilization, so-called, is what, 3,000 years old. Already, we are eliminating the right of every other form to exist. Yeah? Whether it's the butterfly or the Amazon beetle, we're saying we're the only form who can have fun. The rest out. I think that's rather silly. And that might eliminate us as well, too. So global warming, pollution, what have you. So we have to have an alternative paradigm. This one won't work. It's not working. And we'll see what other options there are. So I just read out the little bio I have of Ashish Kothari ji, and then we'll have his presentation followed by questions. Mr. Ashish Kothari is the founder member of Kalprich and active in various people movements. He taught at the Indian Institute of Public Administration, coordinated India's biodiversity strategy and action plan, and served on Greenpeace boards. He is a judge on the International Tribunal on Rights of Nature and helps coordinate Vikalp Sangam and Global Tapestry of Alternatives. He has co-authored and edited various books, including Churning the Earth, Alternative Futures, and Pluriverse, a post-development dictionary. So we are most honored and most privileged and thank Tibet House for bringing to us the annual Spiritual Ecology Lecture 2024 to be delivered by Mr. Ashish Kothari, Eternity in a Second, the Ethics of Radical Ecological Democracy. Over to you, sir.
Thank you so much, Vivekji. That was most generous of you. It's wonderful to see so many people here, as you said, in a very chilly, and I shouldn't say polluted because that's cliched in Delhi, evening. So it's fantastic. Thanks a lot to Tibet House, to Geshe-la, to Tenzing-la, Choran-la, Domala, everybody who's been part of organizing or making this happen. I know because we also organize things like this, and I know how much work goes into the behind the scenes by lots of people who often don't get acknowledged. So many thanks for that. I'm going to get straight, I think, into the presentation, and then hopefully there'll be enough time, maybe half an hour or more, for open discussion, questions, challenges, comments. So yeah. Okay, as Vivekji has said, the mystery of this title, Eternity in a Second. Oh. Can you hear me okay now? Okay, yeah. So I'm going to put up one image which describes this title. This happened to me a few months back. I was at the wonderful Adirapalli Falls in Kerala. And while going down, I was watching with great amusement and interest a group of young monkey juveniles and babies playing with each other. Anybody who has seen babies playing with each other know that you can watch them for hours. I was watching them, and then on the way back up, I just happened to stop and take photographs of one of them, and it was looking at me. I was looking at it. It's very interesting because always through my life I've been told that looking into the eyes of a monkey is often a sign of aggression, so you should not do it. But here we were doing it, and I could not see any aggression. Probably the monkey baby also could not see any aggression. So I just stretched out my hand, just experimentally. A colleague of mine from behind was saying, "Careful, it'll scratch you." It bent down, smelt my fingers, and then magically reached out and touched for a second my fingers. Now, for me, it was a moment that's described. It's impossible to describe that moment. That moment. It was not even a second. It was a split second of this feeling that I've kind of gone back into millions of years of evolution, forward into millions of years of further evolution. Something inside me, it's not the heart, I think the entire body and the entire soul, everything was kind of touched in that one split second. It's the kind of experience that I think a lot of people, especially in our cities, simply don't get. But it is that life transforming moment. And of course, if it happens to us when we're much younger, and it has happened a number of times, this is from 30 years back with a penguin in Argentina. I was watching a group of penguins. This particular one came up all the way to my feet, looked up like that, pecked me on my foot, and then went about doing its own business. And there's those moments, you can have those moments with other animals, you can have them with other plants. You describe the people tree. There are so many trees under which there's that one moment that you have where sun is shining down through it, the tree is looking at you, you're looking at the tree, you're feeling it. It is those moments that actually tell you that there's something special to be alive on planet Earth. And that it's not just me and you, but it's millions and millions and millions and millions of other life forms. And that, therefore, even when one looks at, for instance, kids playing in the sea in Lakshadweep with gay abandon and learning from nature, learning from the sea, learning from the waves, learning from the fish, that what they grow up with, what some of us who may have been lucky enough to have these experiences grow up with, is very, very, very different from the life that we are actually giving to people and to other species, when in the name of development, this is what we're doing to the earth. There's something unspeakably sad and tragic about this. It's not just the facts and figures of how many species we're losing and how much land is being destroyed and how much forest is being deforested and things like that. Those are important. But beyond that, it's just this, it's a feeling of utter sadness and anguish when you see something like this, and when you see that that's happening in the name of human development and progress. So in this presentation today, I'm going to build on this theme, build on it, not just in terms of reason and rationality and so on, but also emotion, also feeling, everything put together, because I don't think one can separate these things, unlike what modernity tells us, that rationality and reason has to be separated from emotion. Don't put emotion into your decision makings, etc. So I'm going to try and put all of this together in the rest of the presentation. We have a very, very profound disconnect with our home. The word ecology comes from the word oikos, which means home. And Professor Satish Kumar, who started the Schumacher, one of the people who started Schumacher College, Jain monk, I'm sure Gisela, you would know him, and many others would know him. He once told me this interesting story. He said he went to the London School of Economics, and he asked the dean there, where is your ecology school? And she said, why should there be an ecology school in the London School of Economics? And he said, actually, the London School of Economics should be housed within a school of ecology, because do you know the meaning of economics? And actually, that dean didn't know the origin of the word economics. And he said economics comes from oikos, just like ecology. Ecology is the understanding of home. Economics is the management of home. How can you manage your home unless you first understood it? Unfortunately, as in our modern pathways of development and what mainstream economists tell us, that has been lost. There's a clear separation that's been made, as a result of which we have this very, very profound disconnect. We've already crossed many of the, now this is talking, let's say, science, we've crossed many of the ecological boundaries, the planetary boundaries that we should be bounded within. We are using resources at 1.5 times the Earth can replenish. And of course, we know that climate change is no longer in the future, it's already here. In many different forms: wildfires, floods, extreme heat waves. Millions of people, tens of millions of people already badly affected by the climate crisis. And it's not just in terms of ecology with respect to other species and things like that. Even if one doesn't care about other species and we just care about human beings itself, you realize that actually behind the glamour and glitz of a city like New Delhi or Mumbai that you see on the screen lies also the lives of hundreds of millions of people who are actually bearing the brunt of that glamour and glitz, and who are actually helping to clean up all the waste of that glamour and glitz, including from the houses of many of us. You see livelihoods such as what you see at the bottom picture there of millions of people in India who are basically just trying to earn a living cleaning up our waste that comes out from our the homes of the rich and the powerful. And so, along with the ecological crisis, we have an intersecting crisis of inequality, and as a consequence of inequality, deprivation of many different kinds. Again, hard statistics are there, but beyond the statistics, it's really about looking at how greed, wealth, the power of the rich and the powerful to do anything that they wish or that we wish, and what that means for the rest of the planet, both other human beings and other species. And from that, the question of what is development itself. This is something I've been asking myself, and the groups I work with have been asking ourselves. We all, virtually all countries of the world except Bhutan, and Bhutan actually is also moving in that direction now, unfortunately, tend to think of development as economic growth. That the more materials consumption, the more energy consumption, the more the throughput of material and energy in the economic system, the more developed a country is. Economic growth rates. We need to reach 7%, 8%, 10% economic growth. China and India have been racing each other, and India claims to be the second highest, and probably now the highest economic growth rate in the world. What does that mean? For some of us, it means a lot. We have access to virtually every material good that we need from anywhere in the world now. We have relatively comfortable lives, etc., etc. But for a whole lot of other people and the rest of the planet, it actually means destruction and devastation. That's an advertisement from about 30 years back from an Indian multinational corporation called Dotsal. And in the ad, I don't think you can read the text there, but the text basically talks about how nature is a barrier to development, to human development, and how Dotsal helps to remove that barrier by cutting through rainforests in Indonesia, digging the earth in India, and laying pipelines. The second image, which I still haven't found the illustrator of, anonymous, tells you another part of the same story, that in this rush away from what were livelihoods, that is to say occupations based on relating to the rest of nature, culture, everything to put together, whether it's farming or crafts or fisheries or whatever, to now the mass industrial production system in which the vast majority of workers actually have nothing creative to do. They're just they're just cogs in a system in which some final product is being made for our consumption, which is what I call then moving from livelihoods to deadlihoods. You have jobs, but those jobs are soul deadening. They're not creative. Right? We also have the crisis of democracy itself. And I'm arguing that this is connected to the same pathways of development and economic growth. Because when somebody challenges it, when I as a farmer don't want to give my land for a bullet train or for anything else like that, which people in New Delhi are dreaming up, or the Char Dham roads or whatever, I get called anti-development. If I stand up enough and speak loudly enough, I get called anti-national. If I speak up a little louder than that, I might even be called terrorist or seditionist. And then linked to the so-called Naxal movement and things like that. Across the world, people who are simply defending their ways of life, defending their territories, their forests, their water, their right to continue the way of life that they want, are killed. That figure is already old. It's now 6 people a week being killed, and how many dozens and hundreds more being imprisoned or wounded or beaten up or whatever, simply for defending their rights. All of these crises and many more that I could speak about, I don't want to speak any more about crises. I don't want to depress everybody. Everybody's already partly depressed anyway with the state of the world, are intersecting. You can't separate the ecological crisis from the political crisis, from the cultural crisis. They are intersecting. The roots of these crises are intersecting, and they are, in fact, for a very large number of people on the planet, they come together so that they are actually facing the worst living conditions, the worst working conditions, the worst conditions in terms of the environment in which they live, and also, of course, being at the losing end of the economic the ladders and rungs. Now, the same system that's actually creating these, and I'll get to that in a minute, is giving us what it considers or what it wants us to consider solutions. So, if you look at the climate conferences of parties, we've already had 28 without solving the climate crisis. I don't know how many more conferences of parties will happen. The solutions that are being offered are things like carbon trading, market mechanisms to solve the climate crisis, techno fixes like these huge geoengineering projects that will suddenly apparently cool the planet, and so on and so forth. Or even things like electric vehicles. Both our governments and many other governments of the world are really promoting this as this is the solution to the climate crisis. Is it? Because with electric vehicles, for instance, somebody somewhere is losing their homes because there's lithium mining that has to happen. They've now found lithium in Kashmir, and that's, to me, a very scary thought that what's going to happen in Kashmir now with for electric cars. And what we're not doing is, if you look at the image on the right-hand side, this is the number of people who can be carried by 30 or 40 cars can be carried by one bus. The solution is not electric cars. The solution is how do we actually think much more differently and fundamentally differently in terms of commoning, for instance, transport systems. And I'll come back to that as a sort of solution, commoning as a solution. This is happening in India. For the last few years, we've had these so-called Atmanirbhar Bharat budgets. And in that, coal mining is being expanded. So it's very interesting, it's ironical that actually communities who are currently Atmanirbhar, Adivasi communities in Chhattisgarh, for instance, who are already self-reliant to a large extent, are being displaced in the name of Atmanirbhar Bharat because coal mining has to be extended there so that India can be energy self-reliant. Ease of doing business, make in India. Craftspersons are saying we already make in India. Why do you need to get people from outside to actually come and make in India? There's already so much happening here itself which can be focused on. So whether it's in the form of the sort of traditional conventional models of development, or it is in the form of the new so-called climate solutions and energy solutions and all of that, land grab, grabbing of resources, especially from the most marginal sections of society, continues. That figure of 60 million is from 10 years back of people physically uprooted from their lands for big dams and mining and things like that. What's the solution? To me, humanity's single most important question is, are there alternatives? Are there ways of meeting human needs and aspirations without trashing the earth and without causing the kinds of inequalities and deprivations that I've talked about? And I'm going to focus the rest of my presentation on that because I think there is, in fact, a lot of good news on that front, which I want to bring to you. I think there's two kinds of alternatives. One is where people are actually saying, no, enough is enough. We're not going to give our lands. We're not going to give our waters. And we're not saying simply that don't bring a factory here or don't bring a dam here and make it somewhere else. We're saying not just not in my backyard, but not in anyone's backyard. We're challenging the fundamentals of what you are bringing, you as in the government or economists or whoever are bringing to us as development. Let me give you these two examples. Some of you may be familiar with them. The picture with the human garland across the river, that's in the Indravati River from the 1980s, of 300 Adivasi villages, and Baba Amte, who some of you would know, was also there, who protested against 2 mega hydroelectricity projects. And in that protest, what they were saying was not simply that we don't want 300 villages to be displaced and our forests to be drowned. Of course, that was part of the articulation, but also they were telling the government, they said, when you look at the river, you think of it as a commodity, as hydropower and megawatts. For us, the river is our mother. It's a fundamentally two very different civilizational outlooks altogether. And they were saying, we will not allow our mother to be shackled by your dreams of progress. In fact, those were successful, those dams were never built. The second image is from Niyamgiri in Odisha, where the Dongriakond indigenous people fought against a proposed mining project by, ironically enough, a corporation called Vedanta, a UK-based corporation, and they were saying that we don't want the mining. So when they were asked, well, why do you not want the mining, and can you give us permission? Supreme Court actually said, please take permission from all the Gram Sabhas involved for if you want to do mining. They told the government. So the government went there. And the Adivasis said, who are we to give you permission? The land doesn't belong to us. The forests don't belong to us. They belong to Niyam Raja. Who is Niyam Raja? Niyam Raja is the deity who actually owns these hills. Go and ask him. So this is like lots of head scratching and saying, how do we ask Niyam Raja? Anyway, finally that mining so far at least has been stopped. But for every successful process like this, unfortunately, most movements actually do fail because the sheer power of corporations and governments proposing these things is much too high. But why it's important to point these out as alternatives is because they're not simply saying no to something, they're also articulating a different vision of relating to the rest of nature and to each other, which is in sheer contrast to the dominant model of development. Now, that you can think of such movements all over the world, whether it's the youth climate justice movements or the movements for new constitution in Chile right now, or the peace movements in Burma, Myanmar against the military government, or even, in a way, the farmers' movement in India, many others which are actually, in that sense, protesting but also articulating a different vision. But along with that, there's another kind of alternative, which is constructive alternatives meeting basic needs and aspirations. In the last 10-15 years, we've actually been documenting hundreds of examples of these across India. And I will show you a website later on where there's 2,000 stories of this kind of constructive alternatives to meeting basic needs like water and housing and sanitation and energy and all of that. But beyond that, also voice and decision making, gender justice, education, health. The same thing is across the world. And at the end, I'll talk about a book. There's a copy of that lying outside for you to see, which has 100 examples from all over the world. Incidentally, this map is one of my favorite images, because every time I show this, at least here in India, people say, why is it upside down? And that leads to a very interesting conversation about how the so-called right side up map, where Europe is on top and Africa is shown to be much smaller than it actually is, this is the actual size of the continents, is a colonial time map. It was made deliberately so that Europe was looking at top and Europe was seen to be much bigger. And you could actually see England, which you can't see here. There's a lot of decolonization that has to happen in our own minds, in our languages, in our cartography, in our, everything that we're actually doing. But let me give you a few examples of these grounded alternative ways of trying to meet basic needs. This is my absolute favorite because it comes from the most marginal section of India's society. This is Dalit women. Dalit, as we know, exploited for hundreds of years as so-called untouchables and so on and so forth, as women also in a patriarchal society, severely marginalized. Till about 35 years back, these women and their families faced extreme situations of hunger, malnutrition, no access to education, health, etc., and of course social ostracization and so on. Then they got together as women's sanghas in about 75 villages, and a federation called Deccan Development Society. They brought back their traditional varieties of millets especially, but also rice and pulses and so on. They switched completely to organic. They completely rejected Green Revolution. All hybrids, GMOs, everything was rejected, all chemicals. They shared their seeds. They shared their knowledge. They fought against privatization. They fought for the rights of women over land, because usually land in India belongs to or is titled to men. And a whole bunch of other things. I mean, I'm cutting a 35-year-old story down into 2 minutes, so obviously I'm simplifying a lot. But through all of that, they were actually able to achieve food security this is one of India's driest areas, by the way. No external irrigation, just whatever rain fell, their own seeds, their own knowledge, everything, for 5,000 families. And beyond that, not just food security, but what they said was Anna Swaraj, food sovereignty, which means our control over everything to do with food. No corporate control, no government control for everything to do with the production and the consumption of food. Very importantly, especially for today's topic, for them, the earth and seeds are not just economic products, economic resources. They are to be related to in the form of spiritual relations. They are cultural, they are spiritual, they have their own life, right? And so every festival, they celebrate all religious festivals there. And in every festival, they're actually celebrating the earth and seeds. And with that, of course, their knowledge and water and everything else. There's thousands of examples of this kind of communities sustaining old ways of protecting nature or finding new ways of doing that across the earth. That website there, I can send it later also to people interested, has hundreds of case studies of these kinds of how people find themselves to be part of nature and therefore also responsible for protecting it in the best way possible. This is all the way across the world now, going away from India. We're talking about the Amazon. And here in the Ecuadorian part of the Amazon is the Sapara indigenous nation. They call themselves nations, which is different from nation state, which we can discuss later if you're interested. And here their challenge is how do they sustain their traditional ways of life in which everything was a spiritual relationship as human beings with the stones, with the river, with the forest, with the animals. Everything was a spiritual relationship. They had their own cosmologies, their own ways of interpreting dreams and their actions based on the interpretation of dreams. How do they sustain that in the midst of the fact that they also are relating to the outside world? So it cannot be an isolated existence. So they're trying to figure out hybrid systems by which both their traditional knowledge and some elements of modern knowledge that they find relevant are combined. They have some need for money, so they're actually trying to build their own systems of healing, which outsiders can come and actually learn from, and they earn some revenues from that without destroying or distorting their own systems. And I'll keep talking about hybrid systems because in today's world we need those hybrid systems. You cannot actually have any one sort of purist way of looking at this. Here's another example of that. These are communities in different parts of the Himalaya where women or young people are actually they're challenging the mainstream models of tourism. They're saying, why should tourists be coming here, exploiting us and our resources, and all the money is made by big tour operators, and then they go away and we get nothing out of this except garbage and trash. We can change that. We can make it, instead of tourism, we can call it visitation. People are visiting us. When they visit us, we will feed them what we eat. We will tell them our cultures. We will learn from their cultures and their ways of doing things. It becomes a relationship, which is well beyond the money that is transacted. So there's many examples of that in different parts of the Himalaya. And through that, actually, young people are getting an incentive to stay back in their villages and earn the livelihood there, but also protect nature and sustain their own cultural traditions. Here in central India, another very interesting example of, if you remember the image I showed you of the human garland across the river, some of those villages, once they were part of the movement, also started asking themselves, saying, okay, we can have this movement against a government decision, but in our own villages, we have a number of problems, right? There's inequality, women are not part of decision making, some people are cutting the forest and selling it off, etc. So what do we do? So they actually revived their Gram Sabhas or their traditional Adivasi structures also of decision making, and started with one village called Medhalekha in Gadchiroli district in Maharashtra, which said, from now on, we continue to elect the government in Mumbai and New Delhi, but in our village, we are the government. Nobody will take decisions relating to our village unless it has gone through our Gram Sabha. And we will also make sure that everybody in the village has the power and the voice to speak in the Gram Sabha. So the women have had their own processes of generating that power, that knowledge, that capacity to be able to be equal partners in decision making. Talking about we are the government in our village. In India, we have some examples of that. They're small scale. But perhaps the biggest such experiment across the world is the Zapatista movement in what is today called Mexico. Now, here, 4 decades back, the indigenous people there declared that from now on, whether the nation state of Mexico exists or not, across our entire territory, we are the ones who will be taking decisions. And that means that every settlement there is responsible for its own decisions, but then it confederates across larger landscapes for the larger level processes of decision making. Later on, when I talk about the frameworks emerging, I'll come back to that. There's a similar thing happening in Central Western Asia, which is the Kurdish movement. Now, this is one of the most war-torn parts of the world. Nobody's yet been able to figure out how do you solve this problem of war between Iran, Iraq, Syria, and Turkey. And currently, Turkey in particular is an extreme aggressor of various kinds. In the midst of Palestine, Gaza, and Ukraine, this is an area that's kind of forgotten. But there's constant bombarding, there's war that's happening. There's 40 million Kurdish ethnic population here, which has been traditionally persecuted by all the nation states that they live within. But they've been fighting for their own independent, not nation state. And I'll come back to that later. They're fighting for their own independent Kurdistan, in which they want to try and establish local direct democracy, everybody having a voice, based on a very interesting eco-feminist ideology called genealogy. Jin means women. Genealogy is the science of women's revolution. Again, there's lots to be told about this, but it's a very, very interesting example of an attempt to create peaceful living with the earth and with each other kind of experiment in the midst of war, and constantly threatened, of course. So therefore, there's progress towards that, and there's two steps forward, 3 steps back, that kind of thing happening all the time because of the surrounding states. Over to another continent, Africa. In the last few years, the South African ecological groups, feminist groups, worker groups, trade unions have got together to create what they call a climate justice charter. They're saying if South Africa needs to move out of the climate crisis, we have to create new jobs for all those who are going to lose jobs. If you shut down the coal mining and the thermal power stations, etc., what are those workers going to do? We need a just transition for these sorts of workers, while at the same time dealing with the ecological aspects of climate. So this is a very, very interesting process. Do look it up. If you look at South Africa Climate Justice Charter, you'll find a lot of it available on the website. And finally, then over to Europe. In the heartland of the capitalist world, these are 4 examples that I've been lucky enough to visit of where people are trying non-capitalist ways of running businesses, of running the economy, and of running society. I don't have the time to go into all of these, but for instance, the one on the bottom right-hand side is a factory that is run democratically by all the workers. There's a big slogan on the factory saying, "We have no boss." And every worker gets exactly the same wage per hour of work, regardless of what the work is. Now, that's truly revolutionary to my mind. The one on the right-hand side is a school that is run by in very high quality teaching, but with very low fees, because the entire community, including the parents and everybody surrounding the school, gives some hours every week for, say, administration or for teaching free of cost. They don't charge money because they realize that what they're doing is actually basically contributing to their own community's children, right? So that's called time banking, and there are many such examples across the world. Now, of course, traditionally we've all had time banking, and many places still do. Traditionally, in a village, if a farmer had to cut a harvest, many other farmers would land up. Farmer would only have to give a feast maybe in the evening. If you had to rebuild your house, other people would land up. They would not ask for money. That kind of sharing of time goes well beyond an economy of finance. It is talking about an economy of caring and sharing, where social relations are at the foundation of the economy. So these are places where they're trying to go beyond the capitalist logic in the midst of a very capitalist society, trying to create or recreate those sorts of systems. Back to India, this is a very interesting example of communities trying to create much more voice and bring ecology, etc., into the urban space. This is in Bhuj. which is an exploding town. And in Bhuj, a lot of very poor people are living there because they've had to leave their villages with no jobs available and come into Bhuj town and looking for jobs and looking for spaces. And of course, the same phenomenon of living in slums and so on. In the last 8-10 years, in a program called Homes in the City, these communities with some 5 or 6 local NGOs have actually established their own planning processes, created much more dignified housing, become self-sufficient in water, and you would realize that Bhuj is actually the driest part of India, and a whole bunch of other things through which they're arguing to the city administration, why should towns and cities be planned only by bureaucrats and politicians? After all, the budgets you're making are supposed to be for us. So why are we not part of the decision making and the budgeting right from scratch? So that's what they're trying to achieve in Bhuj. There are similar attempts at trying to transform urban life to be much more sustainable, to be much more democratic and equitable and just in many, many different parts of the world. Finally, a couple of other sectors that I'll give examples of, and then I move to the last part of my presentation. Technology and communication and media. All those of us who use the so-called social media or anti-social media, whatever, we realize that we actually have no control over it. Today it belongs to somebody, tomorrow it belongs to Elon Musk. Today, Zuckerberg says we'll do something, and then tomorrow he'll say something else completely. And we also know that these are all forms of media that are misused for all kinds of distortions, right? Whether it's electoral distortions or cultural distortions, as we're seeing right now. So how do we actually re-democratize media or communications or technologies for that matter? We think of technological innovation as happening only in IITs or big corporations. For most of human history, technological innovation has happened by so-called ordinary people. Who invented the wheel? Does anybody know? It was none of the big corporations, nobody. But without the wheel, none of what we're doing today would be possible. And so on. I mean, you can talk about thousands of technical innovations like that. So these are examples of people trying to actually bring media, technology, communications back into a democratic space, controlled by people, where people's voices can come out, where our truths can also be put out there without being distorted in the way that is happening in mainstream media, communications, etc. And finally, learning and education. Some of us have been lucky enough to be in schools or learning spaces where our innate creativity was encouraged, where we were not just our heads were stuffed with information, but there was an encouragement to use our hands and our heart and our feet and so on. But that's a tiny minority in India. The vast majority of young people in India unfortunately learn in institutions which do not encourage any of this. They're just stuffing kids' heads with this is the right information, this is what you spew out in the exams, then move into the next class, and your goal in life is to become rich, famous, or powerful, if possible, all three. These are institutions that are saying, no, that's not what education should be about. Education needs to be about how do I become a fun human being, but also a responsible human being, responsible for other human beings, but also for the rest of the planet. How does my innate creativity actually get encouraged? Art is not just one kind which my teacher is telling me. There can be 20 different forms of art, right? Or what Gandhiji called the Nai Talim, where head, hands, and heart all put together. So these are, if I had the time, I would give you detailed descriptions of all these fantastic initiatives are trying to create these very different learning spaces. The picture on the in the middle there is a school that was started by the same Dalit women farmers that I told you about, Pachashala. And there, that guy there is actually teaching physics and chemistry to the students while the students are also learning how to make ganne ka juice, sugarcane juice. Yeah. So there's hands, there's head, all of that is happening. But also the teaching involves saying, okay, we can't grow sugarcane everywhere because that will be very destructive of the ecology and the environment. So how do we actually be restrained also in the way we're doing our farming? So heart also and values kind of comes in. Just to go back to, so one of my favorite pastimes is looking at the origins of words. development, for instance. The word development comes from the opposite of envelopment. Envelopment is to close in, right? So development was to open up. It means to open up opportunities. It was nothing to do with per capita growth, income and GDP growth and all of that. That's what has been distorted to become. School comes from the word skole in Greek, which meant learning with leisure, which is the exact opposite of 95% of India's schools, right? So, in the way in which we actually, in the last 200, 300, 400 years or whatever, with colonialism and development and so on, even the original meanings of a lot of words have actually been fundamentally distorted. During the COVID pandemic, we were, of course, hearing all the horror stories of how communities were collapsing, how work had stopped, how people had to walk 2,000 kilometers to get back home, etc. And how so many people, many of our friends also actually died or were very badly affected. But then we started hearing stories of where communities were actually thriving through the pandemic, not just surviving, but thriving. And this really made us curious. What was happening there? Why is it that some communities had no problems at all? So we started investigating and putting stories together, and we now have 100 stories from across the world, about 70 actually from India, of why this was the case. And it was very interesting that these were places where communities had already or was quickly able to build a community health system. So they had much more defenses against the pandemic as a health crisis. Equally importantly, they had localized economies, their own food production, or a very localized exchange in which their livelihoods were dependent not on long distance but on very localized. For instance, a place called Navdarshanam, very close to Bangalore, had a relation. The farmers there had a relationship with consumers in Bangalore, and they were able to convince the administration to let that exchange continue. So the farmers still had a livelihood, and the consumers still had great organic food. So what we learned in these 100 case studies is really that if one can really create or sustain those kind of localized, relatively self-reliant systems, if we can sustain or create community responses, not individual privatized, but community level responses, if we can sustain or create institutions of communities that are able to survive those sorts of crises, then we are much better off than in the current system in which there's so much individualization, so much privatization, so much breaking down of institutions, so much dependence on an external entity, whether it's a government or a corporation, that as soon as a crisis hits, you collapse. That's going to happen with the climate crisis. It's going to happen with many others. COVID was not the only pandemic. There are more coming. So let me then go to the last part of the presentation, building on these sorts of examples to say, I could go on for hours just talking stories. Storytelling is very, very important, and I love doing it. But let me get to now looking at, okay, what are these stories telling us? I just talked about the lessons from the COVID examples, but there are many others also. So in the last few years, one of the ways in which we're trying to understand these phenomena, so look at it more holistically, is what we call this flower of transformation, with 5 petals: the political, the economic, the social, the cultural knowledge, and the ecological. There's a bit of an artificial distinction. Those of you who are academics here will feel comfortable with it. Others may not. Academics love making artificial distinctions, so that's fine. But we know that life is not lived in these 5 spheres or petals separately. There's intersections, messy intersections amongst them, and we'll look at those. But it's another way of trying to understand this reality. And at the core of this, which is also the core of today's presentation, is a set of ethics and principles and values. Let me quickly, I'm not going to go into detail on any of these, but just quickly look at some of what's emerging from these grounded initiatives. If we talk about democracy, and this year is obviously very crucial for that, we think of elections. We think of, okay, we're the world's largest democracy because we have the right to vote once in 5 years. In the 4.999 years in between, we may have no rights, but we can go and vote for another party into power if we don't like this particular one. What these initiators are saying is that's not democracy. Democracy is power of the people. It's my power, your power, our community's power to take decisions that affect our lives, not have somebody else taking those decisions for us. Original meaning of democracy, democracy, power of the people, not power of bureaucrats and politicians. Unfortunately, for decades, we've now willingly given over that power because we believe that democracy is about elections. So we have to also start fundamentally altering this and looking at how do people get empowered to be decision makers and not just give over all their power to those we elect. Along with that has to also then come our power over the economy. There's no point my having local political power if I have no power of how the land is going to be used, or how the forest is going to be used, or how the machinery is going to be used, or who is controlling the currency, the rupee or the dollar or the euro, right? So therefore, the democratization of the economy, bringing back an economy of not just money but caring and sharing, like the examples that I was giving you, visibilizing the completely invisibilized role of most women in the economy, or grandparents, for instance, who look after grandchildren when parents are going off for work. That whole transformation of the economy, moving away from GDP and looking at real indicators of well being. Does everybody have clean drinking water? Does everybody have clean air? Great question to ask in Delhi. Does everybody have access to good learning opportunities? Does everybody have a voice in decision making? Those become the indicators of well being of a society or a country, not GDP. All of that has to go hand in hand with the third sphere, which is social justice, because you could have potentially a Khap Panchayat kind of situation where there is local political control, there's local economic control, but where the women have no role in decision making, where the so-called lower castes are continue to be ostracized and marginalized. So you need to also have the struggles for social justice, well-being, equality, against marginalization, etc. With that, the fourth sphere of cultural knowledge diversity. This is one of my favorite stories, which comes from Professor Ganesh Devi, very, very renowned linguist in India, who conducted what I think is one of the most exciting projects in the world, called the People's Linguistic Survey of India, many years back. And he came out with 50 volumes of covering 780 living languages, not dialects, full languages, right? So for instance, Kutchi is not a dialect of Gujarati, it's its own language, right? Bhojpuri is not a dialect of Hindi, it's its own language. That's what they were saying. Now, if you take this language diversity, and he told me after once in a lecture, I was talking to him, and he said, Ashish, do you know that Himachal Pradesh has 230 different terms for snow? One word, snow. Different times that the snow falls, there are different words. Different sizes of snowflake, there are different words. The rapidity with which snow melts, there are different words. And he says, if we teach only in Hindi in all the schools of Himachal Pradesh, and we lose that whole language diversity, we're losing libraries of knowledge that could be crucial for dealing with the climate crisis. That's what's happening. We have 23 right now, constitutional languages, or 24, I don't remember exactly what. And most teaching takes place in one of those, right? Which means there's another 750 languages that are not being taught in our formal school systems. And even though we talk about mother tongue teaching, it doesn't actually happen. So that's just one example of knowledge diversity and cultural diversity that is crucial. And the kind of struggles that are encompassed in these initiatives that I'm talking about are where people are trying to sustain that diversity, revive the diversity where it has been lost, and struggle against homogenization, struggle against this thing that only one religion is important, or only one language is important, or even that there is a national language, which, as we know, there isn't, but it is often imposed. So these struggles for cultural diversity, knowledge diversity, and keeping knowledge in the commons. All the books that we produce are Creative Commons or copyleft, which means copyright, no. I mean, where are my ideas come from? They're not just created anew in my head. They've come because millions of people before me have done other things, and I've sort of picked up here and there. So why should I be copywriting my presentation, for instance? Yeah. So against privatization of knowledge, privatization of property, commons, etc. And finally, and this is my favorite, because I started off as an animal rights activist 45 years back, is what I would call radical ecology, or ecological or spiritual ecology. You can call it different things. Now that figure on the bottom is really, really telling. I learned the left side figure when I was doing biology, that we are a pyramid of life, human beings on top. Nobody actually told me at that point in time that there's some gender bias also involved, because the man on top and a woman below. But people were saying that no, we therefore have the right to rule the earth because we are a pyramid. We are the most intelligent sapiens, right? Supposedly. Uh, Indigenous people, Adivasis, don't agree with this. For them, the second figure is truth. It's a circle of life. All species equal to each other. That's what Buddhism is telling us. That's what so many religions are actually telling us. At the fundamental core is whether it's spiritual faiths or religions. This is what actually we're being told. But unfortunately, we're living the last few hundred years like we are this ecological pyramid, and we therefore have the right to do whatever we want to the rest of the earth. So the struggles for um, reintegrating ourselves within nature, we often say humans and nature, whereas we should always be saying humans and the rest of nature, right? Reintegrating ourselves, thinking of ourselves as being part of nature, respecting all species like we want respect for ourselves, the struggles for understanding that just like we think we have spirit and soul, other species may also have spirit and soul. And so, therefore, also the struggles for acknowledging the rights of other species, not just in a formal legal sense, but in a more fundamental sense of respect and equality. This is also very much fundamentally part of the sorts of transformations that we're talking about. Now, if you were to put these 5 different petals together, we can begin to imagine South Asia in a very different way. For historical reasons, pre-colonial and colonial, South Asia is divided into 7 countries. And what that has done is that these are artificial boundaries. They have no, basis in either culture or nature. What that has done, let's take Tibet and Ladakh. There used to be migration of wild animals and pastoral peoples and trade back and forth for hundreds of years, probably thousands of years, and for wildlife, millions of years. You create a boundary, you put a border, a fence, and you put armies on both sides. None of that is possible anymore. India, Bangladesh, Nepal, the Gangetic Plains, the Ganga and all its tributaries is one ecological unit, divided into 3 or 4 countries now. So India can make a barrage at Farakka, not caring about what happens to people and wildlife in Bangladesh. India is considering a dam in Indus, not considering what might happen to people in Pakistan or wildlife in Pakistan. China is making a huge dam just north of Arunachal Pradesh, not caring what happens downstream to us in India. So how do we reimagine boundaries in South Asia from an ecological and cultural perspective, which is called bioregionalism or biocultural regionalism? There's very interesting experiments on this in many other parts of the world. In South Asia, it's still obviously very difficult to even argue this, because people might call me anti-national if I say that boundaries should be opened up. But I think we really do need to start imagining and then moving towards a South Asia where cultural flows, ecological flows, economic flows, where, for instance, the Sundarbans could be governed by the fishing communities that are both in Bangladesh and in India without a border in between. Or where, let's dare to say that India, Pakistan, the communities that live on both sides could actually be governing that as a peace zone. These are things, let's dare to imagine this. Because at the core of this flower of transformation is a set of ethics, principles, values that have to govern how we treat each other and treat the rest of the planet. I'm going to put these up there without going into any detail, and then I'll end in the next 2-3 minutes. Let me just point out 1 or 2. I'm not going to go into detail in all of them, but for instance, I've been constantly talking about how these alternative initiatives are about cooperation, solidarity, the commons, not competition, which means we fundamentally have to change the education system, not hostile competition between economies and nation states and countries kind of thing, but more cooperation, not individual privatization, but the commons, especially with things like nature and knowledge. Or, for instance, saying that labor It's not why should somebody who writes about agriculture get more money than the farmer who's actually creating producing the food. Yeah, it doesn't make, there's no natural reason that has to happen. That's the way society has developed. So how do we actually give dignity to physical labor as much as to intellectual labor? Which is not to say that drudgery is therefore accepted, but moving away from that, but also saying that physical labor. Happiness is not about the Reliance ad saying happiness. The Republic of Happiness is about buying a 40-inch color television set, or maybe now 56-inch. I don't know what the latest is, or an i15. What's the latest? iPhone 15, whatever. But it's really about having opportunities like this, of talking to each other, of being out in under a fantastic tree, of course also having the material needs we need, food and energy and so on, but thinking of qualitative happiness. Okay, I'm not going to all of these. I'm just putting them out there. What all of these put together actually signify is worldviews that are celebrating, where it's not our film stars and cricket stars and politicians who are celebrities, where it's that Dalit woman who is producing enough food for a family of 10 people on 1 acre of land in an ecologically sustainable way. That is the celebrity, which means it's worldviews that are actually celebrating life, not money, not power, not fame. Okay, and that upturns a whole lot of things that we are otherwise used to. One of these worldviews could go back into the ancient Indian concept of Swaraj. It's very badly defined as self-rule, but Swaraj was really about freedom, autonomy, self-determination, and I'm sure there are different terms in different aspects. I think Geshe-la, you can tell us. I'm sure there are Tibetan or Buddhist terms for this kind of thing, where it is about my and my community's freedom and autonomy and so on, but with responsibility to not do anything which will undermine your freedom and your happiness. So it's not the American notion of freedom where I can run my SUV wherever I want and I can bomb a country that doesn't give me cheap petrol because it's my free way of life. It is really about rights and responsibilities. It is about freedom with restraints. And we have kind of more recently sort of extended that to say that responsibility not just towards other people but also other species, right? So therefore, eco-Swaraj. The concept of radical ecological democracy is very simple. As an aside, again, the word radical is very badly distorted. Radical does not mean people killing each other. Radicalized youth should not mean young people killing each other. Radicalized youth should mean young people who are able to go to their cultural and ecological roots. It means going to the roots, right? There's nothing bad about the word. So what is radical ecological democracy? Very simple. We're all decision makers. We're born with that right. But we use our power of decision making with responsibility towards other people and towards other species. There are similar notions all over the world. The book Pluriverse, which you'll find a copy of outside, has about 90 of these. Some of them are from very old, thousands of years old indigenous people's notions. Some of them are the spiritual foundations of religions, and a lot of religion is now, people are kind of trying to revisit what religion should be, whether it's socially engaged Buddhists or liberation theology in Christianity. Many are actually trying to raise that, and I would wish that many more in Hinduism also do that right now, especially, is to say what are the spiritual foundations, which is really about solidarity and love and generosity, not about hating each other or thinking ours is the only religion on the planet. And then there are many coming out from the belly of the beast, so to speak, from within capitalist societies. Degrowth in Europe is a very interesting example of that. Ecofeminism in many parts of the world are examples of that. So what is very important is that none of these are an umbrella over everything else. You can't say that Swaraj is a form of degrowth or the other way around. They are unique. There's a pluriverse. That's why we use the word pluriverse and not universe. We have to move away from universities and become pluriversities. Multiple forms of knowledge, multiple ways of being and doing have to be taught. So that is a really crucial part of this. Lastly, this question that I always get asked: how do you achieve scale? There's so many fantastic examples that I've given, and there's many, many more. But at the macro level, we still have the crises that we're in. How do we change that macro picture? And I'm sure nobody has all the answers to that. But here's some thoughts. The more we can actually put resistance movements, constructive alternative movements together with each other, create more of a critical mass, learn more from each other, inspire other similar examples across the world, connect to them horizontally. And the more we can not just do these practical examples on the ground, but also envision the societies that we want, create the utopian visions, and then say, okay, how do we move there using whatever is already available? The more scale is likely to happen. And I'll just give you two examples of where that has happened historically. And I think we're on the cusp of a third one right now. One is the anti colonialism movement. For 500 years, half the earth was colonized by European countries. In the space of about 30 to 40 years, late 19th century, early 20th century, most of those were thrown out. That doesn't mean forms of colonialism aren't there, they are, but at least that form. And the second example is patriarchy. I can say, I think, with some confidence that most of the women sitting in this room right now would not be sitting here were it not for the fact that a few individual women and small groups of women stood up 100 years back, 150 years back. Savitribai Phule here, I mean, so many people in all over the world who actually said, no, women have equal rights. And they suffered for it. They were killed. They were, beaten up, etc., etc. But today, as a result of that and the growing movement of women's equality and rights, at least some of those forms of patriarchy are gone. Not everything is gone. There's still a lot, but some of them. And the third one I think that's going to happen is the ecological revolution, as a revolution of the conscience and as a physical, biophysical revolution. Because the more people realize the danger we are in with the climate crisis, etc., the more I think there will be both the consciousness and the physical action to change that. Two processes that we're involved in to help with some of this is one is based in India called Vikalp Sangam, which is all the groups that are involved with these sorts of positive transformations in different fields, whether it's gender justice or food or agriculture, whatever, to try and come together, learn from each other, collaborate, challenge each other, and create visions of what India could look like. We have been meeting everywhere, many different parts of the country, 30 such sangams or confluences. These are not conferences, confluences of coming together and doing all of that, documenting positive stories so that they can inspire others. This is the website. I always tell people who are going into their exams, young people, that take 5 minutes out and go to this website. You'll cheer up. It's you're probably depressed going into exams. So there's lots and lots of very, very interesting, positive, inspiring stories there, and of course many more that need to be brought up. The articles, films, different ways in which you'll see them. And then building on that, connecting to similar processes everywhere in the world, we initiated this global tapestry in 2019. It's called a tapestry because we don't believe in hierarchical processes. We believe, like the traditional Godadi in India, you make a blanket out of 100 different little pieces of cloth. So create a tapestry which links up horizontally with similar objectives of collaboration, actions, joint advocacy, collective visioning of what the world could look like. There's lots and lots of movements all over the world who are connected to this. And this is a website which gives you stories from other parts of the world. So last couple of books that I just mentioned, I have already been mentioning the one on the right, which is Pluriverse, which has 100 stories of 100 essays of radical transformation. Geshe-la has an article there on Buddhism and many others. There's a copy outside for you to look at. And the one on the left is something we tried in 2017, asking 40 people who are their own experienced or experts in different fields like gender and sexuality, conservation, education, health, Adivasis, pastoralism, food, agriculture, etc., to write their vision of India in 2100 and then come back to the present and say, how do we get there? What are the pathways? What do we already have that shows us how to get there? What are the challenges, the hurdles, etc.? So it's a very interesting experiment. And again, there's a copy outside for you to see. And talking about utopian visions, this is one of my favorite quotes. It is from an Argentinian filmmaker called Fernando Birri, but it's quoted by the famous Latin American poet Galeano. I'll let you read it. I don't think I need to read it. But basically, why utopian visioning is important, however impossible you might think it is. So for me, that split second contact with that monkey baby showed me the possibilities that we can and must continue dreaming of a better society and doing whatever we can in our own small ways or big ways to move towards that. And I'm hoping we're all part of that journey. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ashishji. That was absolutely fascinating and wonderful. And yeah, that split second eternity, absolutely gorgeous. I guess that little baby was responding to the spirit in you and the spirit in us, and it had the courage to, here's another alien species, and it's been doing a great damage, taking away all the homelands of all those creatures and all other creatures, and yet it's an act of faith. I'm reminded of Krishnamurti describing something like this in one of his books. Jiddu Krishnamurti, and he was at Banaras in a little cottage along the Ganga, and a huge monkey apparently came into his room, and Krishnamurti put out his hand, huge monkey, and he just held Krishnamurti's hand, and something very similar, but you captured it beautifully. I think Buddhism is all about Maitri. The four Brahmayas of Buddhism, Maitri, Mudit, Karuna, and Upeksh. It's all about friendship, and I think that is friendship. So, amongst all your diagrams, the middle was values, and I guess values basically means whenever the Dalai Lama is asked what is your religion, he says it's kindness. Full stop. So gorgeous. So let's open this up for questions. I also love the utopian slide, the last slide. You go 2 steps forward and it recedes 2 steps. The whole point is that you walk the good path. I think that's why we're here. That's why we were born. Is spiritual exercise. Vivekananda used to say, the world is a spiritual gymnasium. We're here to have spiritual exercise. And perhaps that's what your slide is saying. So onward we march. So questions? Yes, ma'am.
First of all, thank you so much, Ashish, for this fascinating lecture. I just have 2 specific questions. That to what extent do you think the difference in geographical spaces affect the human-non-human relationship and contribute to the development of ecological self? That is one question. And the second question is that do you think that people, especially the academic environmentalist thinkers, are aware of the division between human, non-human, and Earth as a living organism, and think of the ways to actually distinguish the hierarchies instead of creating one? Thank you. That's those are the 2 questions.
Thank you. Please correct me if I'm misunderstanding the questions when I respond to them. Difference in geographical spaces, does that create a difference in the way we look at, say, the environment, or that's the first one, right? Yeah. So I'm not quite sure what you mean by geographical spaces, but if, for instance, that includes living in a city versus living in a village,
Yeah.
that could.
Yes, to some extent, and also I meant very specific species. Like for example, say Amazon or Sundarban. That is
Okay.
different from like cities like Delhi.
Different, yes, but I mean, in many fundamental ways, it will still be the same. If you're grown up in the Sundarbans as a part of the fishing community, or you're grown up in the Amazon as part of, let's say, the Sapara indigenous nation, your sense of connect with the rest of nature would be the same, but it would be very different. The reflection, sorry, the how that is expressed would of course be very different, because a forest is different from a mangrove system, which is different from, let's say, suppose you were a Maldhari kid growing up in Kutch, right, which is a salt desert and grassland. So the manifestation of that would be different, but the sense of connect, the sense of responsibility, the knowledge that you get from nature, and the wisdom that you get from nature, those would be common elements. But when you then transfer that to, let's say, growing up in Mumbai, where you may not have access to connections with other species in the same way that the previous examples did, then that would, I think, there would be fundamental differences there. In fact, there's growing studies now, growing amount of literature now on studies which are showing how intellect and even physical attributes are stunted when we grow up in areas that have very little of the rest of nature in them. A very interesting paper recently on how a diversity of bird sounds, when you grow up with that, not just bird sounds, but a diversity of bird sounds, that actually leads to much more alert mind than if you were not. So there's a lot of in that sense, a geographical space could make a huge difference. Yeah. In the second question, you're saying, are environmental thinkers aware of the differences between humans and other species? Is that?
Yes, and also I meant that instead of creating a hierarchy like environment is greater, are they thinking of actually distinguishing the hierarchy and creating a symbiotic relationship?
Yeah, so indeed, in fact, some of the, I mean, so indigenous people have always said this, right? So there's no, the circle of life. But in modern science also, a lot of the, there's this fascinating research now of people looking at, for instance, how have indigenous people spoken to whales? Hmm? There was a fantastic paper I read just 2 weeks back on this. Or how do people have a sense of communicating with other species, and what could be a scientific way of actually doing that? Even, for instance, recent things on the music that is created by plants. Yeah. So, okay, they're using some new fancy modern gadgetry to actually understand that. But they're actually coming to the same conclusions that indigenous people have been there for a long time, but coming at it from a different thing. The recent research with octopus, for instance, and how intelligent it is. The research with vultures. There was a paper I read last week about how vultures are possibly the most intelligent bird species. And we always think of vultures as these, we despise them for whatever reasons. Crows, and experiments with crows. Gorillas is 30 years back experiment. So I think the more we actually try to understand, whether through intuition and feeling and so on, or through hard science, the more we actually are coming to the conclusion that there's no essential difference between humans and other species. There are differences, of course. I mean, I am not the same as the monkey that touched me, right? But in essence, as a life form, we probably have much more in common than what we have in difference.
The Dalai Lama has been having for many years these mind and life conferences. And if you're aware, he brings scientists, quantum physicists, and neuroscientists to talk and look at what Buddhism tells us about the same things. And often, Doji has done this often, at quantum levels, matter interacts with consciousness. You do your light wave experiments, and you look at it in a certain way, it behaves as a wave. You look at it another way, it behaves as a particle. There's no objective matter out in the universe. And codependent arising is this whole idea that all phenomena codependently arise. We're in this together. Rumi perhaps put it best. He said, consciousness sleeps in rocks, stirs in plants, and wakes up in humans. It sleeps in rocks, still there in rocks. Otherwise, where would the quantum experiments work? Stirs in plants, maybe a little more in the monkey, and then goes down in us monkeys because we're destroying the whole place. So we're certainly not intelligent. So yeah, more questions.
There's many languages that I have an interview on my channel with this person called Theokasin Ghost Horse, who's a Native American Indian. I don't know, it's still called Indians, but anyway, Native American. And he says that in our language, we have no nouns, which are objects. Everything is, the word is a relationship. So everything is a relationship. Otherwise, what you do is you objectify somebody, and then you can other that person, which we do now even with people, and say, well, that's another, so I'm able to exploit it or kick it off or kill it or whatever. But if it's a relationship, you would find that much more difficult to do.
So the central insight of Buddhism is no self. There's nothing has independent existence. Yes, everything's a relationship. And in the Indian word for civilization or culture is samkriti. You know, Sanskriti, actually the bindi is ma, samkriti. So the English word, all English comes from Sanskrit. The word similar comes from sam, creation comes from kriti. So the capacity to view all creation with an equal eye. सारी कृति जब एक समान दिखने की क्षमता हो तो समकृति है, otherwise नहीं है. कुछ भी आप बना लीजिए. Only if you can see all creation with equal eye at the level of spirit, you're civilized, you're civil, you have culture. So, and I loved another slide of yours where it says, celebrate life. Yes. That's maybe, why else are we here, for God's sake? Yeah? Not for long faces. Celebrate life. And how can we celebrate life if we're not sharing and we're not affectionate and we're not in a mood of friendship? We're competing, aggressive, competition, power. Well, how can our lives be sustainable? Forget the planet. More questions, folks. Yes, please. Who had this question? We had a question here, unless somebody else had a question. Yes, ma'am?
Yeah, I've had my hand up for a
Yes,
while.
please. Yeah.
No, I just wanted to thank Ashish for this message of hope, because we often come up with this undergirded cynicism, which I would call the Tina factor. There are no alternatives. The systems are too deep rooted. Because what you've shown is not just, it's not just utopian visions, which of course I love as a literature person, and of course we'll be having a discussion. I've written about utopias, and we are part of a group which will be conversing on this more. But the very grounded, solid, case-based narratives that you brought to us. I think what that does is it doesn't allow us to dismiss it as simply the dreams of some, this John Lennon kind of imagine, right? Which is very easy to do, right? That writers imagine and philosophers. So it's the groundedness of your presentation that I really wanted to laud, because it compels us to confront the often, encountered objection that all of this is merely, just talk. So I just wanted to thank you for putting it out there in such concrete terms, and to bring together a very global tapestry of it, and and to link it to two historical developments: the decline of I don't think colonialism is done yet, and neither is patriarchy. But the fact that we've made huge advances there, and you're bringing ecology there, I think that just raises the pitch, to another level. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Thanks. Just as an aside, Maya, I've been saying these are not concrete examples, they're earthy examples.
Yes.
Because we have to move away from concrete. Sorry.
Yes, thank you, Ashish sir, for such a wonderful lecture today. Two observations from my side. When we are talking about spiritual ecology, I think we should even focus on music and dance in a true democracy. I was recently attending Ricky Tej's show in Delhi, and he is a 3 times Grammy Award winner. So when I saw his music, and I'm a student of Buddhism, and I was mesmerized by his song, Shine Your Light. And if you look at his words, it really touched, similar to I'm an animal lover myself. And the moment you showed me, I could understand. So, that's one thing that I wanted to tell you. Secondly, Nepal is considered as a true Hindu country. Okay, recently, one of the lawyers, he approached me and he told me that he is doing his PhD and, relating Buddhism and law. I was amazed. He is staying in Nepal and he is a Hindu law. I mean, please don't mind it, me using those words. And his PhD work is relating law with Buddhism, and that also in a qualitative manner. So I have to ask him more questions how he is doing it. Then he told me he has collected a lot of cases from the community in Nepal, and so you would be amazed the way they are approaching the society, picking up those laws. And then I asked him, from where did these, how are you going to connect with Buddhism? He told me, and I was amazed that yes, they are picking up the narratives from the people who are living there, from the Buddhist community, and that's how he showed me the various narratives, the cases, and all. So that is another spiritual, because he is focusing on karma, compassion, karuna, that is, and a lot of other things, four noble truths from Buddhism and everything. So that's all I wanted to pinpoint as a true democracy, ecological democracy, because that involved even animals also. From here, a question was raised because I was equally attending Jainism course along with Buddhism, and I came across Pythagoras theorem. So, Jainism and Buddhism in a country went, I mean, there are historical developments and stories that, yes, this is going on, this came first, that came first. However, when I saw the agamic studies in Jainism and Buddhist narratives, I did not find much difference. Though Jainism had different, and if I have to be much more closer to spiritual ecology right now in India, they are considering Buddhism, Jainism as a minority class, and I had to raise up this question: why minority? So if Nepal can do that, so why I wanted to pinpoint is that we have got a circular life that you have shown. Buddhism and Jainism will never come up in a circular form. They are giving equal status to all the living forms. So somehow the
Excuse me, ma'am.
picturization or the visualization.
Sorry to interrupt. May I know what
That's
is your exact question?
My question is, can we include these things also in spiritual ecology? So that's what I pinpointed in the beginning only. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. So I think one of the things that I've said is the radical reinterpretations of religions, going back to maybe their spiritual roots and all of that. And like Geshe-La's article in the book Pluriverse talks about that from a Buddhist point of view. There are similar articles from Jainism, Hinduism, Islam, and so on in the book, so you can read them. So yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think this needs to also come in, but it will also then mean having to confront the ossification that has happened to a lot of religions, confront the very rigid hierarchies and inequalities that have also come into most, probably all mainstream religion, that will have to be challenged as we go to the fundamentals of these religions. And I like I think you also mentioned this, that Dalai Lama has a book called Beyond Religion. Mm-hmm. Yeah, where he says, I don't want people to be a Buddhist. I don't want people to be any religion, whatever. I just want people to be ethical and moral. That's the fundamentals of all faiths, right? So in that sense, yes, it's very much part of this.
Ajiji, thank you so much for your talk. In fact, two things. First is, in your own words, I'd like to know what exactly do you mean by eternity in a second, number one. Number two is that while I profoundly admire and support all your efforts, at the same time, like say these concepts, for example, like no factories, no minings, no GMO, a green revolution, and so forth. These are amazing thoughts. At the same time, don't you think that the the GDP So without these, GDP will go down. If that happens, then neighboring countries, they will attack you. So how do you defend yourself? This is what is happening.
Difficult questions you ask.
Ukraine issue. So all these things are examples.
Yeah, sure. No, thanks. The first one, well, both are difficult questions. The first one, and I think I kind of failed to express that. I will probably still fail to express that. The feeling that I felt, the profound, it's not even, I mean, profound, whatever, everything that I felt when the baby monkey touched my finger, or the penguin looked up at me and pecked my foot or whatever, and many such experiences, to me encompass, as I said, the whole of evolution, whether one looks at evolution from a spiritual sense or a scientific sense or whatever. And in that sense, in that split second, eternity was encompassed. So that's my the way I'm kind of thinking of it. But it is also, of course, then beyond that in terms of not just the material thing, but also the consciousness, everything that gets encompassed in that. And as I said, I think I'm very poor at expressing it. It's really what I went through then that gets expressed in that phrase, eternity in a second. Yeah. Love. Yeah. Now, no factories. Well, firstly, I don't think either I or any of us who are asking for radical transformations is saying no economic production. But what form of economic production? Yeah. So I gave the example of that Greek factory, which is run by the workers. It is a factory, but what they did was when they took over, they switched from chemical-based detergents to olive oil-based detergents. So they said, how do we become more ecologically sustainable, even though we are producing cleaning agents, right? But use natural products for that. And then, of course, the economic social transformations of becoming democratic decision-making, equal wages for all workers, etc. But the ecological aspect was also as fundamental. So which is to say that neither they nor I are saying no production at all. Economic production, yes. In what way, for whom, how much, all that is the important question and that we need to ask. If you take, let's say, GMOs, if the Dalit women farmers are saying we can produce enough in a dry land area with no irrigation, with no GMOs, with no chemicals, why do we need GMOs? So again, it's not that we don't need agricultural production and seeds, we do, but not through means that are being pushed for other reasons, especially profits and power, right? So now if we do that, it's possible that as a byproduct, GDP will rise. But that's a completely different approach than saying, let's first raise GDP and then make sure everybody gets the money, which never happens. So the aim is well-being through these means, and as a result of which GDP may or may not rise. That is not important. Now, can we defend ourselves if GDP goes down? I think it would be very interesting research if somebody could do it, to ask whether high GDP countries are actually less prone to being invaded than low GDP countries. Perhaps that is the case. But then that's where we need to change global relations. This cannot happen without also global relations changing. There has to be a simultaneous kind of a struggle for also changing global relations. If we move towards, let's say, bioregionalism, where the Thar Desert, the Sundarbans, the Tibetan Ladakh Plateau all become zones of peace governed by the local communities, then do we still need an army? Are we still threatened by the neighboring country? Yeah. So these things will have to happen simultaneously, which makes it that much more difficult. But it is these visions and moving towards this. Let's take European Union. Not a great example for other things, but World War II, could anybody have imagined that could be stopped and European Union could become something where anybody is able to go freely back and forth without any visas or passport? So why can't that happen in South Asia? World War II was way worse. I don't know why people still. Sorry, I'm still calling it World War II. European War II was way worse than what our situation in South Asia is. But people moved out of that. So I think it's possible to dream and to move towards that, and this will have to happen together. Otherwise, you're right that a stronger country is likely to take over, and then what's the point of doing all of this?
Yes, sir. Yeah. Very nice lecture, sir. So my question is, you have told in one slide about the alternative media and communication technology. So there are a lot of environmental skepticism is there, climate change denial, people are there, pseudoscience there, and then fake news is there. So how we can deal with them? And how we can motivate people to do the environment conservation and those activities.
I think one of the reasons why we get swayed by fake news or denialism or what's happening in the religious sphere these days is because we have been deliberately dumbed down in school. We have not been encouraged to ask questions. We've not been encouraged to believe that we have the ability to think for ourselves and not have somebody else thinking for us. And until we change that, which means fundamental changes in the education system or how how children grow up in our families or whatever, I don't think we'll be able to deal with fake news, because we will always believe what somebody else tells us because it's coming to us from some technological gadget and say, oh, ये तो सच्चाई होगी अगर television पे आ रहा है. So it means these are long-term things. There's no overnight solution that I can think of. But what can happen in the short run is these alternative media spaces. Community media, we have 150 community media stations, community radio stations in India. Many of them are run not so well, but many are run very well, like the one that I showed you with the Deccan women. That's going to, like what the DDS, the Deccan, the Dalit women run, goes to about 300, 400 villages. So they're able to tell their stories, which mainstream media will never tell. So the more we're able to create those spaces, even in the short run, we can, try and dispel with or challenge fake news. Or media or websites like fakenews.com or whatever it is or something, right? So there's always a counter trend that can be encouraged, and the same with technologies. But at the fundamental level, radical democracy is about each one of us having the capacity to think for ourselves, to act for ourselves, to question things, or what Krishnamurti always said, right? And that has to change at the level of each one of us as a child and a young person.
So, as always, one can go on for eternity, but we have limited time. So, I believe Dr. Williams. Yeah, okay, we'll do that. Who had a question?
Our friend.
Yeah, okay. Let's make it quick then. All right. Let's be democratic, but let's do it quickly.
Thank you, sir. I'm Hyungjin from South Korea, and I want to express my gratitude to share your insight. And I have one question. Actually, I was very impressed by one advertisement about environmental campaign, eco-friendly campaign that urinating during the shower. Yeah, it can reduce amount of water spend, and yeah, it can help many poor people around the rural remote area, and because that is actually in my country, South Korea, urinating in public shower room like gym, swimming pool. This is the most representative that rude behavior. Yeah. So
yeah, sure.
Yeah, in my opinion, there are many conflicts between our common sense and eco-friendly behavior. So I think we should change our habitus by education and culture. But my problem is that I think we don't have that much of time. We have very limited time because our air pollution and climate change is almost reaching limits. But but on the other hand, if strong government lead every individual people to follow their eco-friendly direction, I think I'm afraid that it can be also another kind of totalitarianism. So we
This will
mankind
have
is
to
in
be
dilemma.
this would
Yeah.
have to be cultural changes. It cannot be
Yes.
something that is dictated to us from above. Whether it's urinating while you're showering, or whether it, for instance, those of you going to Ladakh are demanding a flush toilet when there's a perfectly good dry toilet that can be used, but you don't want to use the dry toilet because you think it's dirty, blah blah blah. Or, for instance, using human manure in agriculture. Ladakhis have been doing it for centuries, but if you go to the rest of India, they'll say, "Oh my God, no, no, no! That's like, how can we eat food that is growing with manure that is coming from our own toilets," kind of thing. So there's also a lot of cultural issues, caste issues, gender issues that kind of get built into this, which is why it's not something that you can dictate from above. It has to be those cultural changes, consciousness changes that will have to come up.
Can we collect the questions together? We have limited time. So Dr. Williams had a question.
I did. I realized that you'd love to bring this to a close, Vivekji, so I'm going to try to frame this as short as possible as a comment and invite perhaps a comment from Ashishji later, and because I'd love to hear more about it on this specific topic. But Ashishji, I'd like to commend you and thank you for what was a very stimulating presentation on an important topic. I see this topic as important for a number of reasons, not least of which is that while these alternatives are out there, we hear very little about them. And they're just not well known enough. And it's so important, the things that you're writing, these kinds of lectures, for us to hear about them and to reflect upon them. One of the things I'd like to invite all of us to reflect upon, and I would have invited Shishji to talk a little bit more about this, is what you hit at the end of your talk, where you were talking a bit about what can we do in order to support, to help, to cultivate these kinds of alternatives. It's not just learning about them, but the real difficulty of encouraging them. And one of those ways you did speak about is helping them to connect with one another, which is not an easy task at all. And there are attempts to do this. And you didn't mention one that I was a little bit surprised at the absence of, but there is the World Social Forum, the next one being held in 2 weeks in Nepal, which is a way in which these kinds of groups get together and talk with them. But I'd love to hear more from you, Ashish. I'd love to encourage you all to think about what it is that we can do to help and encourage and cultivate these groups.
Thank you, Dr. Williams. Ma'am?
Thank you so much, Ashishi. That was a fantastic lecture. So very quickly, in an age where Karl Polanyi was right, the economic is not divorced from the social and political, but in an age where political democracy is under challenge, economic democracy is definitely under challenge, why do you have faith in ecological democracy? And I put this in your reply to Venerable Geshe-la, you spoke about a changing global order. But if we think about a changing, like a multipolar world, where in fact, those who were colonized now have dreams of, leading the kind of advanced lifestyle of those who were the colonizers, don't you see ecological democracy being more under threat than ever? So I would love to know, without being cynical, but just...
Yes, please.
Yeah, my question is generally in that 5 petals, the central, this thing is values. And I think it's very closely connected with moral and ethics as well. So the point is that in our education system, of course, we have no exposure or no proper understanding of moral ethics, values. This is moral science is probably one subject that we have, which most of us have ignored in school. And then also what happens is that when you get into, for example, I'm an engineer and an MBA. So when you get into that stream, then you get further divorced from any exposure to this thing, unless you have a particular, yearning for it on a personal level. So I'm quite curious whether there is a possibility of a consensus on a global level or any kind of consensus on what are the values that, we are aspiring for a society.
All right. Shall we take this here?
Okay, so Dr. Williams, World Social Forum, I didn't mention it here, but in fact, we're all going to be there at the Nepal World Social Forum, and the global tapestry of alternatives is very much linked to it. But the World Social Forum itself, I mean, in a nutshell, and we can certainly talk about this more, the promise that it showed in the first 8-10 years of its existence, over the last few years, it's kind of, for various reasons, it's got ossified and all. It's trying to reinvent itself through the, what's it called, the World Social Struggles Assembly, or Assembly of World Social Struggles, which is interesting. So let's see. But it is certainly still a very important forum where we can engage. And what we want to do is to bring the energy about radical alternatives there. Because much of the World Social Forum focus has been on resistance, which is needed and it's still important. But the slogan, another world is possible, what we want to do is to bring saying another world is happening. And what more then needs to happen? So it's that relationship that we're trying to build with that. But through any of these forums, to create more networking, to create more connections, to create more solidarity, and to do it in a horizontal way, and not have a small clique of old mostly men dictating what should happen in a global network. I think that's a lesson we need to also learn from the World Social Forum. However much I respect it, there are problems. Ecological, why do I have faith in ecological democracy? But I think maybe I wasn't able to explain it well enough. I don't think ecological democracy is divorced from political democracy and economic democracy. In fact, that's why the petals are together. Why I think why I think this might just work is to go back to what I said about the anti-colonial struggles, anti-patriarchal struggles, and now the ecological revolution. Because I do believe, I may be totally wrong, and I don't think I'm going to be alive to see whether it works or not, but I do believe that we're on the cusp of an ecological revolution. And I think that's partly because of the fact that now we know the earth is one. Maybe indigenous peoples always knew that, but now even from a so-called rational point of view, we know that it is one. The climate crisis is giving us this sense that we are one planet, and that what I do here can impact somebody 1,000 miles away. To me, this is actually a great basis for a revolution in ecological consciousness, and through that also then the actions that are there. And therefore, perhaps some amount of hope in radical ecological democracy. Values, ethics, and morals. Education system. I mean, I remember we used to have something called value education, right? There was something like that. It was boring. It was boring as hell. I mean, I did not learn any values in that, right? So, what we need is to inculcate these in a subtle way. How do teachers behave with kids? How do parents behave with kids? What do we, when we're doing engineering, for instance, are we actually looking at the rest of the planet in a way that is respectful? That's what we need to bring into all the subjects, and also break down the barriers between subjects. There is absolutely no reason why biology should be taught separately from geography, from sociology, from economics, from whatever. These have to come together in some way. So the so-called interdisciplinary, I would not even say interdisciplinary, but transdisciplinary, breaking those borders is really, really important for us to do that, which are then fundamentally based on the ethics of mutual respect, the ethics of generosity, the ethics of love, the ethics of respecting all life. That is that's the value education that I would argue for, and not as a subject. I remember we did a report for the Ministry of Environment 25, 30 years back. They asked us to report on the state of environmental education and what needs to change. And what we said was, environmental education as a separate subject is a disaster. People will learn it for exams and then forget all about it. Environment needs to be infused in all subjects. And it can be done in fun ways. You can learn mathematics by counting, numbers of species or whatever. There's so many different ways in which you can do that. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. Even the Supreme Court gave an order saying environmental education is a mandatory subject for all primary schools. So, it's there as a thing, but it doesn't really end up doing much except stuffing some information in the minds of kids. So, those fundamental changes, I think, are needed for values to become infused in our sort of daily life. Yeah. One exercise we do with, I used to do in my old school, Sardar Patel Vidyalaya in Delhi, which is where I studied, is I used to run the nature club there, is to look at the dustbin at the end of the day. What has been thrown into it, every product, pick it out and say, where has it come from and where is it going to go? And when the kids start doing that, they actually realize that there's things they should never have thrown, or things that they go back to their parents and say, why did you give me this product and not that? Parents were complaining to us saying that you're getting children to ask us awkward questions. But so, yeah, I mean, I think that's the sort of thing that we need to do much more.
Thank you. I think democracy is about conversation, both debate and dialogue, and I think we've had it here. And spirituality is all about sharing and interconnecting. And I thank Tibet House for organizing this great conversation under the blessings of His Holiness. And may we continue to have such discussions, and may a lot of action come out of this, and we may collectively change the very face of this planet. I agree with you. I think this crisis has forced us, if nothing else, to reawaken. And I think we should take this opportunity out of this crisis. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Vivek Suneja-ji. And I would also like to convey my thanks to Mr. Ashish Kothari-ji. Now, may I take this very opportunity to kindly request our director, Venerable Geshe Doji Ramdullah, to kindly speak a few words and give the concluding remarks before we end this session.
So I, for sure, I'll not take much of your time. In fact, the reason why I'd like to say some words here is for the fact that this presentation is amazingly beneficial, and that I would say that the world should hear this, and there should be some change. So let me just identify some very important words which Ashiji indicated, that all workers get same wage despite what they work, and how to be responsible, and the core values, and access to good water, air instead of GDP. Then cooperation among the people, Swaraj, learn from others, inspire others, be inspired by others, global tapestry, dreaming of better societies, change global relations, and so forth. So all these, we see that they are extremely important ideas, and also that people here, no doubt, that we are interested, we are keen to work towards this. At the same time, how to materialize that? This is a very serious question, how to materialize this. And yes, towards the end, Ashish also touched on this area. As a subject, is it really beneficial? Or, so what needs to be changed? I would say that one thing, we have the Dr. Ashiji, who you have seen, how his presentation, there's so much of passion in there. And in fact, why Mr. Ashiji is here for Tibet House talk was that last time we invited him for end of the talk, and it was extremely inspiring, very academic. At the same time, there's a heart there. So this is something which is required. So for all these programs like what Ashiji to his end indicated, are the model science which used to be taught in various schools. There was a problem. People learn what are the values, A, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then they have no value. So let me share with you one thing, that while we have these topics, subjects there, but still it is not adequate. What Ashiji said is very precisely indicated. That once I was invited for a conference, and the title of the conference is conflict resolution. Let me repeat it, conflict resolution. And I was so busy. And the organizer who created this topic, conflict resolution, and he was asking Tibet House to ask the director to send him my concept note or my abstract. And yes, I was so busy. I was traveling. I could not, and I was always asking the secretary, please tell him that I will get back to you soon. And one day he sent a message, email to the office saying that what's the topic? Conflict resolution. And the email that I got from the convener of the program, the conflict resolution, said that ask him not to come to the conference. Ask him not to come to the conference. He cannot even send the abstract in time, right? So this is where we have to walk the talk. So therefore, as a subject, people will learn, but will not walk the subject. So therefore, how to make it happen? This is an extremely important point. So this is the issue. This is where we get stuck. Everywhere. Once I was again asked to be the chair of one of the very important talks by prominent, I think, the Padma Bhushan, the awardee. And he gave a talk for 1 hour. At the end, what he said is that finally the ultimate source of happiness is to have communion with the ultimate. To have communion with ultimate. And he did not speak anything how to have the communion with ultimate. And he stopped. I said, your next book should be on how to have the communion with ultimate. So this is where we get stuck. So with this in mind, it is my responsibility just to introduce both of them. Dr. Ashiji, you have already seen him, and then Professor Vivekji. So why we requested him to be the chairperson today here is for the reason that he was the one who actually brought this principle of the universal ethics, which Dr. Ashiji indicated, universal ethics beyond religion, on such a large platform. Delhi University, when he was the Pro-Vice Chancellor of Delhi University, Professor Vivek Sunyaji. So in fact, you be with him, you'll feel that this is the embodiment of this person, is the embodiment of universal ethics. Just so we can see that Dr. Ashiji is the embodiment of what he's speaking. So finally, what we need is that each one of us, in what way we can embody ourselves, like two of them. In what way, little way, we can embody ourselves to live our life more compassionately towards yourself, towards your family, and towards your friends, towards the ecology. This is the spiritual ecology. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Venerable Geshe-la. Now, I would like to request our Director, Venerable Geshe-la, once again to kindly present the souvenir and the white scarf to our chairperson, Mr. Professor Vivek Sunyaji, and our guest speaker, Mr. Ashish Kothari-ji. Venerable Geshe-la. Ladies and gentlemen, let's hear a big round of applause for Mr. Ashish Kothari-ji, our guest speaker for today's evening session. Professor Vivek Sunyaji, our chairperson for today's evening session. Thank you, Geshe-la. Now, before I conclude the session for today's annual lecture on spiritual ecology, let me just wind it up on this note that today's lecture was exceptionally enlightening and really thought-provoking for all of us, and prompting us to reflect deeply and consider implementing valuable insights for the future. Moreover, it underscored the importance of raising awareness regarding gender equality and advocated for an approach that recognizes its ecological benefit. So basically today, the very morale and the lesson we learned today is all about the interdependency in this world. That all of us, all living beings and plants, humans, animals, we are all interdependent to each other, and we should not break the very ecosystem of this world. All right. On this note, at the same time, I would also like to thank all the participants who are gathered here for, taking out your valuable time, and especially during the question answer session, I would like to thank all the participants for taking this very opportunity and making the best use of this opportunity to ask questions to our guest speaker, Mr. Ashish Kothari ji. Thank you very much. And I would also like to thank our director, Venerable Geshe Doji Damdula, for always guiding us, and directing us to a path which we all desire. And at the same time, I would also like to thank our secretary, Mr. Tenzin Kunyabla, for always leading us and supporting us with every effort, exceptional effort. And also my colleagues, Mr. Sering Tundula, Mr. Rabyangla, my colleague, Ms. Tenzing Domala, Kamazumbala, and Kamasichula, and Mr. Legmanla, and I have a few more names. Without taking much time, I would like to thank each and every one of them for making this evening session a wonderful and a grand success. Thank you very much, and have a pleasant evening. Good night. Thank you.